Hey, what's up guys? JB here. As many of you probably know, Final Fantasy Tactics is slated to return here in War of the Visions Global this week, and it really is long overdue. It's been way too long since these beloved units have been usable at a high level in the game, and I know many of us veteran players have certainly missed seeing them out there. They are a big reason many of us, including myself, started playing this game in the first place. I've seen a lot of hype and interest from new or returning players on this event as well, maybe who weren't able to play or pick up these units during that first year. And this video today is really for you guys out there. And I think the question on some of your minds probably is, will these enhancements that the tactics units are getting actually make them competitive and viable, more than 2 years after their initial release? Or are these units relegated to nostalgia or collector's items at this point? And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into here today. This is going to be a two-part series. I've divided the units up based on how their banners originally were presented on the global side. And that means we're going to be starting today with Ramza and Orlandeau, the very first tactics units to join us here in War of the Visions. So let's check out what Gumi has done to make them relevant again. Now, similar to what I did in my recent summer units video, I'm not going to dive too deep into each and every aspect here as I normally do, since these units have been with us for some time now. But I will go in depth, into the enhancements that they are receiving. And I do have the full infographic and character sheet here with their upgraded 120 attributes. So feel free to pause it and take a closer look at it if you need to. Now, Ramza's TMR, is one that is very unique in the game. But sadly, it is one that I've yet to ever find a use for, more than 2 years into it. And while I do love the flavor and callback to the original Final Fantasy Tactics game with this TP restore effect that it provides, and of course the iconic Ramza uniform, I really can't recommend pulling for this TMR whatsoever, or even building it, if you happen to pull Ramza. Like I said, I haven't really ever found any sort of relevant use for it. So purely just a collector's item at this point. Now in terms of Ramza's stats, the one thing that I actually don't have shown here is his magic value. But Ramza is actually very balanced when it comes to his attack and magic stats, and we're going to be looking at similar levels to his attack shown here. Comparatively, he's going to have a pretty solid base value, but the innate total coming in at a below average level. And that is just kind of a theme overall, I would say, for this unit. Now, he did actually get a small bump in his innate agility. He's going to go from 60 up to 64, which does help him out a little bit. He definitely needed it, since his base agility is among the lower tier of the game at just 52. Thankfully, Ramza, though, does have access to an agility-based passive in Shadowrunner from his ninja sub-job, though. I will say that the hit points for Ramza is one area where he is doing pretty well amongst his competition, and he is coming in at an above average level for both innate and base values. His innate total in particular, I would say, is approaching that bruiser class. He is at almost 4,300 HP here. The takeaway I would say when it comes to his stats though is that, he really just continues the same story of what he was at level 99, which is kind of a jack of all trades archetype. Kind of decent at everything, but not really standing out or excelling in any one area. Now let's focus on his mastery ability, since I think this is one of the main areas of enhancement that Ramza will be seeing. And that's because with all the tactics units, they are getting a Mastery 2 update in addition to their EX jobs. And the areas that are in bold are things that have been upgraded. He'll get the standard light elemental mastery there with the HP and light attack. His innate slash attack is getting a bump as well. That's going from 10 up to 20, and he is getting some much needed slash penetration at 20%. He is picking up an upgrade to his limit burst as well, which we'll look closer at here in a few minutes. I think it's decent overall for a mastery upgrade. I think though, considering where this unit was coming from, it really wouldn't have been out of line whatsoever to really give him a little bit more love here. I really would have liked to have seen maybe some defense or spirit penetration here in his mastery ability as well. Maybe even an accuracy bump would have been nice to see too. Now in terms of his defensive stats and resistances here, not really much has changed. I really would have liked to have seen maybe a bump in that magic resistance in particular. Maybe that weakness could have been eliminated or lessened just a bit. If that was the case, I think it could have really enhanced one of his main niches, with his Spellblade sub-job. His other resistances here, though, are very solid across the board, as they always have been. Now, as we know, this is a very old unit, so his kit was definitely showing his age. And even when it was first released, this was not among the most well-received or most powerful kits in the game, even in year one. He was never really a meta unit when it comes to PvP. So let's actually look into the EX upgrades here and see what Gumi has done to improve that. Now his first upgrade here is going to be to his Shimmering Blade ability, and this ability was previously single target only. It's adding a cross area effect, bringing it up to a total of 5 range, which is nice. and is adding a 25 defense and spirit break before the damage is applied. As an added effect, it's also reducing the target's defense penetration by 30. Now this is admittedly a very nice upgrade for Ramza. It's giving him a little bit more support utility here with the debuffs that are added in here, while upping his damage potential at the same time with those breaks. So I think this is really going to be his signature move and definitely one of his best skills. And I think it's probably one of the main things that you want to build around if you're considering using this unit. Now only one other unit in the game currently has this kind of defense penetration reduction utility, and that is Summer Lilith. We actually got that a little bit early as part of the summer enhancements. Now with a skill like this, I think that you could consider pairing Ramza here as a support for a couple of very high defense units. And then you would be looking to hunt, physical based teams with that. If you consider, most modern damage dealers are probably somewhere between 60 to 80 defense penetration, reducing that by 30 is going to be a considerable loss to their damage. Now, if you did play Ramza before, you know that one of his marquee skills was his shout ability. The skill was actually pretty good in the early days of the game, as we didn't have access to many team-based buffs back then, or even very many TMRs, that had this sort of utility. Of course, in the current state of the game, a 30% attack and magic buff seems very pedestrian, but with the EX upgrade, it's getting a considerable bump in power here. It is getting up to a 60% attack and magic buff, which is pretty nice. And it is also adding a protect effect along with it. And you can see it has a very large area of effect, making it very easy to hit your entire team with this in one buff. So that protect getting added in there is a very nice buff for Ramza as well. Layering in that protect ability, on top of reducing the enemy's damage with the defense penetration debuff that we were just looking at, I think really furthers that niche and direction for Ramza as a tool to really be used against physically heavy parties and just a little bit further. Now Ramza's all new Job 25 ability here is very on theme with those first two upgrades we looked at. It's giving him a 35% physical barrier as well as 20 single target resistance, both of those effects to himself only. Along with that, it is also giving him 25 slash attack as well, so a little bit of an offensive buff there too. I do like this buff quite a bit as well, very nice survivability aspect, especially when you consider having protect in there along with the barrier. That is definitely a big reason why Joker from Persona 5 has been so strong with the layering of those two effects. In Ramza's case though, it's a little less strong though. It's coming across two separate buffs, so you'll need to make sure that you can get both of them off, in an ideal situation. And you would also have to consider if you were wanting him to use, some kind of TMR, maybe in lieu of this effect. So that's going to be all related towards, what sub job you're using and what map you're on. It could be very map dependent and the size of it, of course. But, it is very nice utility here. I do like this Job 25 here. It is pretty nice. Now his final upgrade here is for his Limit Burst Ultima, and this one is getting upgraded from a 200 modifier up to a 240%. Prior to the damage, it is adding a general dispel effect on it as well. Always welcome to have this kind of utility, especially when it's coming in an area of effect like this one. This one is also a guaranteed hit, as it was before. It's always had that 100% hit attribute. Now the one quirky thing I'll say about this ability is that it's his only magical attack that he has anywhere in his kit, and it is also a non-elemental attack as well. I do love the flavor and lore significance of that. That is very much Ultima at its essence. But unfortunately, this Limit Burst has always been part of what has made Ramza so confusing to use and build as a unit. Other than his base magic stat, being pretty decent, as we mentioned, he has absolutely no support for this skill anywhere in his kit, when it comes to spirit penetration or magic res penetrations, or even modifier enhancements to make this attack all that significant or scary for an opponent. If you were to build Ramza as a pure magic-based, Spellblade type unit, it could hit decently well against less tanky targets out there, but certainly against any tank who has any modicum of spirit or magic resistance, this is definitely going to hit like a wet noodle. And it may even have Ramza in a position where he might not use this skill whatsoever, just because it's going to hit for less damage. Alright, I'll put this slide up here real quickly next, and this is just to highlight some of the other skills that Ramza has access to. And from his main job, I think the most notable ones here are going to be his 3-hit chain attack, which is called Triple Blow. And this one actually has a pretty nice modifier on it as well, so it's a very nice PvE skill. Remember that modifiers on chain attacks are spread across the hits of that skill. So having a higher modifier on it, like this one does make it that much easier to cap it like in a guild raid type situation. Now just this past week on the Japanese side, they actually did overhaul both of Ramza's sub-jobs of Spellblade and Ninja. So I have highlighted the skills here which are getting upgraded for him that we can look forward to here in a few months. And unfortunately, I'll say when compared to other units, Ramza is really getting the short end of the stick when it comes to these sub-job upgrades. Not only because the sub-jobs themselves, I'd say, are a little bit weaker in terms of the upgrades they received, but also just in the access of skills that Ramza has within those jobs that actually got upgraded. Now, of the skills that got upgraded within Ninja, he actually only has access to one of them, and that is Utsumi. That skill, of course, provides a huge 60 evade buff to the unit for 1 turn today. That is getting up to a 2-turn buff in the future. I will say this is very nice for some evade units out there. I think that it could potentially have some niche use for Ramza as well. I was playing around with an evade buff for Ramza. I was able to push him up to about 295% evade, which is actually, pretty decent. It is definitely not on the level of the top tier units out there, but it's only maybe just a rung or two below it. And considering that, if you add another 60 evade there on top of it with this buff, it certainly makes him very viable, I would say, as an evade unit. The problem is, once that 2-turn buff wears off, he's definitely going to be able to be hit quite a bit easier. So I'm not sure, how viable that is. Maybe it could be more of a surprise build type situation, and maybe that could be pretty effective. But overall, though, I'd say the upgrades for Ninja are pretty disappointing as a job. And even more so in Ramza's case, because like I said, the only skill that he has that is actually getting upgraded is this one. Now the Spellblade subjob for Ramza is also getting some upgrades, and one of the best skills in that job has always been the resist magic buff. Now in addition to the 38 magic resist that it already gives today, in the future it will be adding in a 20 spirit on top of that for the party. I actually do like the buff on this skill quite a bit. I think it's actually going to round out his support kit pretty nicely. And I think that Spellblade is certainly one of the better options to use on Ramza. But if you actually want him to be using the magic slash skills that are included in this job, you definitely will need to focus on your magic value and make sure you have some enhancements for that in your build. Now Banishika Blade is the only other skill in Ramza's kit that is picking up an upgrade. And in addition to what it did before, it's now going to dispel any debuffs that may be present on the caster. So I think this upgrade is decent enough. Debuffs are a big part of the game nowadays. So any way that you're able to cleanse and remove those, I think is pretty powerful. I'd say if you were trying to leverage this skill, you definitely would probably want some healing behind Ramza to get the most benefit out of it. And I think if you're including his resist magic buff, he certainly does have the ability to get fairly tanky against magic damage. I had to say, up until this past week, I had been holding out, a lot of hope that this subjob overhaul to Ninja and Spellblade would maybe have a significant help on Ramza's meta position. And sadly, just due to the skills that Gumi picked to upgrade and sort of the lack of overall power that was infused into those jobs, Ramza just really isn't seeing very much benefit at all from his subjobs being upgraded. In fact, 2 of the better buffs that Spellblade received, Ramza actually doesn't have access to. And that was the Magic Barrier skill, getting upgraded to a 70% potency, as well as the innate AP that was available to that job. Unfortunately, Ramza is not going to have access to either of those, which is truly unfortunate. Now, I did actually make a mock build here for Ramza, just so you could get an idea of the numbers that we might be looking at in a full build. And I built this around that niche that I was talking about earlier, sort of using Ramza as a support style unit for a couple of high defense bruisers, and then pitting that team up against a physically focused enemy. So I have paired Ramza here with 2 light units who can put up some pretty gaudy defense numbers in Cecil and Engelbert. And I really did focus and lean in on the equipment for that purpose, and I even gave them all defense trust stone sets as well. So the idea here is that Ramza is going to be able to pass protect onto his allies while also lowering that defense penetration of the enemy. Cecil is also going to be important here as well. He's going to be able to pass that 50% barrier onto everyone as well. And I think once those things are online, I think that the defense mitigation here should be pretty considerable. Now the offensive power of this team is, definitely going to be somewhat limited, so I have tried to enhance that there where I could. Again, Ramza has no innate defense or spirit penetration, so I have tried to enhance that with the black garb for that 20 spirit pen, as well as an attack set there in the trust stones. So considering that, you can see that really the maximum you're going to be able to get Ramza to is 30 defense penetration. And no, unfortunately, he cannot wear Oldoa's apron, though it would have been nice. Now, he does help the team out here with that shout buff and kind of increase the offensive potential there a little bit with the attack buff. So I think that, along with lowering the defense pen of the enemy, there could be something here. I'm not really in love with it, but I'm really trying to do my best here with this unit, guys. Because this is by no means a meta team, guys. I'm just trying to leverage, what is here with the unit and trying to come up with some ideas. It is going to be a very niche idea, a very niche team at best, and it will definitely hinge on you finding a pure physical team to sort of take the most advantage of it. But again, I just wanted to sort of showcase this as an idea for what this unit can potentially do with these upgrades, and I will be putting a build together for each of the tactics units, and I will include links for that in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Ramza? For PvP, this will be a very niche unit at absolute best. As we just talked about, one of my main issues with this unit is that he just has a complete lack of defense or spirit penetration to really have any sort of offensive power. And that really has the potential to completely shut down his damage completely. Now he does make up for that, I think, quite a bit with some support that he has in his kit. And I think if maybe he has some better way to help sustain the team, in terms of maybe a little bit of healing available to him in his kit, that could make him a little bit more of an interesting choice and play. Maybe something like a regen or a health restore, while he was actively battling the opponent. Sadly, he just doesn't have any of that sort of capability, though maybe in between Guild War battles, he could take good use of a Mashari TMR to sort of heal up your tank. I will say once again, that I did have some hope that Gumi might be able to save his kit for PvP just a bit with those sub-job revisions. And as we talked about, those hopes were definitely dashed, this past week on JP with the really uninspired upgrades that we saw when it comes to Ninja and to a lesser extent Spellblade. And of course, Ramza is just missing out doubly there, just because he doesn't have access to the job skill which received the most significant changes. Now, making things even worse for this unit is that one of my biggest gripes with Ramza has always been the passive abilities from his main job, Squire. Specifically the acquired job point passive, which maybe had a place, in the very early days of the game where it was very hard to farm those job points. But this is just completely obsolete in the current state of the game. And I can say definitively that Ramza's Squire job has the worst passive abilities in the entirety of War of the Visions. So sadly, unless they start looking at enhancing unique jobs as well as part of those revisions, this is really strike 2 and strike 3 for this unit, because he is in dire need of some better passive abilities. On the brighter side though, I do believe he will be quite solid in guild raids. He has that defense and spirit break, in that one Shimmering Blade ability, and it certainly will help Elena's Iridescent Blade quite substantially. On top of that, he does have that 3-hit chaining ability and triple blow as well with the very nice modifier. So I think that is the current silver lining, when it comes to this unit, and is a definite reason why you might consider pulling for him as well, if that type of gameplay is important to you. Alright, so let's take a look at Orlandeau, aka the Thunder God, here next. His TMR, it's actually pretty decent. If we could get an upgrade to have 2 casts on this TMR, I think I would like it a lot more. Otherwise it's pretty similar to Black Rose Helena's TMR with the 35% barrier. It is just lacking that additional agility on top of it. It was actually a pretty decent TMR, at once upon a time, in its day. I think there are just much better options out there at this point. Now, in contrast to Ramza, I do think that Orlandeau is a much more straightforward and what his strength is going to be, and that is as a high damage physical bruiser. And in his case, he definitely has the stats to back that up. He has a very solid HP total that you can see here, a pretty solid base attack to build off as well at 395, and his luck value is also probably one of the more surprising things about him. He is getting up there at almost 270 innate luck, which is among the top 15 in the game as of today. Now, believe it or not, he can actually be a mid-tier evade unit, since he does have an evade-focused passive in Blade Soul, and he does have an active ability as well from his Samurai job in Illusion. In terms of his evade capability, he is right there, in or around the same place as Laswell. Now, looking at Orlandeau's Mastery ability upgrade here next, of course he's getting the Lightning Elemental Mastery, just sort of matching all modern units at this point. He is getting a much needed 30 defense penetration. All of those early units in the game, none of them actually had any innate defense penetration until Lucia came into the game. So getting that here on Orlandeau, I think, is a big part of modernizing his kit. I do wish that it was a more standard 40 defense penetration that we see across most modern damage dealers, but certainly I think it is better than nothing, and it will help his damage significantly. On top of that, he is getting some enhancements to his damage resistances here, with his slash and missile resistance going to an impressive 30 and 25 respectively. Now, notably, one of his major weaknesses before was his magic resistance, which was coming in at a minus 20%. That is getting shorn up in a big way. He's getting 15 magic resistance, so that's going to put him at just minus 5. And that definitely makes it much more manageable, in terms of shoring that up with vision cards and espers. So Orlandeau actually does have quite a few enhancements for us to look at here today, so let's jump right in and we'll look at first at his EX upgrades. And the first one up is going to be his Crush Armor ability. Definitely one of his defining skills on his initial release. Of course, that was also his highest range skill as well, at up to 5 range. And it always had that 25 defense break coming prior to the damage, which is part of what made it so good. Now this one is getting a significant bump in its damage modifier. It is going from a 121 small mod up to a 165 medium mod, which is pretty significant. On top of that, it is also getting a 30% hit chance added into it as well. And it has all this for just 15 AP. It's a very cost-efficient skill, and it is a great finishing move, as it always was, and it will definitely continue to be. And I think this will definitely help, in terms of having an option for him to sort of build up against evade units as well. Now his next EX upgrade is a self buff, and that is to his Crest of the Black Lion. This was one that originally gave him a 40% attack buff, as well as nullifying several status ailments that you can see here. This buff is getting a significant enhancement, and in its EX form, this is going to add a 10% AP auto restore, which in a completed build, he should be in the neighborhood of 190 to 200 total AP. So he'll be looking at 19 to 20 AP per turn for 3 turns. Now, in addition to that, it is also going to give him 40 area resist when his HP is at 70% or higher. There's really no other way to say it. This is an incredible self buff that Orlandeau has access to, and I would put it right there among some of the better self buffs in the game. Even more so if you're able to take advantage of the nullification of those status ailments that it provides. Now that conditional area resist here definitely makes it beneficial, I would say, to have a healer behind him and try to help keep him topped off so you can get maximum benefit out of that. And I think if you were able to stack up enough area resist, between this buff and maybe a vision card and other means, it's definitely feasible that Orlandeau might be able to even take a couple of hits before this were to wear off. Now his Job 25 ability, we're unsure of what it's actually going to be called. I was thinking maybe Northwane Strike, for something that would reference the original game. But this one is giving him a second area effect option here in his main kit along with Divine Ruination. And it's bringing 2 pieces of very nice utility. And this one is actually going to Dispel Courage while also lowering the slash resistance of the targets by 30%. And those 2 effects do come prior to the damage. Now, as we'll come to see, in the mock build portion of the video a little bit later on, Orlandeau's attack stat can actually be pretty considerable. So when you combine that with the fact that this Imperil is coming prior to the damage, this skill actually will have the potential to hit very, very hard. Now, as part of the Mastery 2 enhancement that we were looking at earlier, one of the things was that his Limit Burst actually did receive an upgrade, and this one is actually getting a pretty considerable upgrade. Of course, it always had that large diamond area of effect on it, and it always gave him that haste effect afterwards, which was very nice. The problem with this skill is that it was always very heavy in its AP cost, and oftentimes back in the day, this was one that players would sometimes turn off because of that. Now with the enhancement to this skill, while this haste effect is active on Orlandeau, he is going to pick up an AP consumption reduction of 25%, while also having 50 debuff resistance. And that will definitely make it very difficult to land debuffs onto Orlandeau. And in turn, that is going to increase his survivability substantially. Now I did mention that AP cost, and one thing not on the slide here is that it is also getting a reduction in its AP cost. Initially, it was that massive 58 AP cost. That is going down to a more common 43 AP and much more usable and palatable at that level. So it definitely makes it a lot more economical to use, and you'll definitely want him to be leading off with this early in the fight to get access to those buffs. Now, similar to Ramza, we are aware of some future sub-job upgrades that are coming to Orlandeau, and actually he will be getting those a bit sooner than Ramza. We should actually be seeing the upgrades to both Samurai and Knight within the next couple of months. Now, starting with the Samurai job, his illusion skill is going from a 0 to 1 in its range height. Definitely makes it a lot more usable in terms of a party buff. Now, on top of that, it will add 15 area resist to the caster as well. Now, that added utility there, I think actually does make it very usable both in and out of an evade builds. More so for other units though, because, as we talked about that Crest of the Black Lion skill, it actually is already giving him some area resistance. Now his Hien skill is also getting upgraded here, and this has always been a pretty nice, low AP cost finisher style skill. This one's getting a pretty cool upgrade, and that is that it's going to restore 8 AP back to Orlandeau on a killing blow, which all things considered at that point is going to make it a 4 AP cost, which is very, very economical, very nice. Now Congo is also getting upgraded, and that is going to have a 3-turn pre-damage 40% slash attack penetration buff. On top of that, it is getting an AP reduction on the skill. It's going from 36 AP today, and it's going to go down to 28 there in the future. I'd say solid buffs all around here for the Samurai job. This was definitely the sub-job of choice, I'd say, for Orlandeau back in the day. And if you have access to Esther's vision card, you can see here with that buff on Samurai, the level of slash res penetration that Orlandeau can start to build up is actually quite considerable. Now, Knight is his other sub-job, and it got, in my view, what are some of the more substantial sub-job upgrades that we have seen to date. And that is starting with both of the passive abilities from Knight getting an upgrade, and starting with Divine Protection here. And now, in addition to the 15 debuff resistance that it has today, it will also be adding 12 area resist onto that. So if you start to think about some of the EX upgrades that we looked at for Orlandeau, this passive ability I think flows very nicely into that. The area resist and the added debuff resistance. It just allows you to stack those things very nicely, and you can actually get his area resist up to some pretty considerable totals if you happen to have access to either Lightning's or Ibarra's vision card. Now that debuff resistance there also does stack with the buff from his limit burst, which will just make it that much harder to land any sort of debuffs onto Orlandeau. Now the Knight HP up passive is also getting an upgrade. In the past this is one that probably wasn't really looked at too closely, but now in addition to the 15% HP, it is adding 40% slash res penetration innately. This is quite amazing, as Orlandeau actually didn't have any slash res penetration whatsoever in his kit, and you definitely had to rely on vision cards or equipment in order to get it. So this upgrade I think definitely puts it up there, among some of the better passives to have access to in the game. So Knights of the World out there, definitely rejoice for this one. Now the next upgrade that Knight is getting is to its Divine Healing ability. It was always a very underwhelming buff, just sort of essentially raising your HP level. So now in addition to raising your HP level, it is going to be raising his healing power and giving him full immunity to elemental debuffs. So really this guy is just becoming this sort of immovable object with all this debuff resistance that he's getting. And honestly, once all these buffs are online, and if he has somebody like Resnick behind him, if you don't have a Dispeller on your team, this guy is going to be extremely difficult to take down and deal with. Now the last buff here for the Knight class is to his Trinity Break skill. And similar to Congo, that is actually coming in with a 3-turn slash res penetration buff. So yet another way that he can sort of build up and augment his slash res penetration. Trinity Break itself is a pretty decent skill as well. It is breaking 3 different stats with the attack, magic, and agility. Keep in mind though that it is a single target only skill. So after everything we were looking at there, I have put together a mock build here with a double bruiser team, which would include Esther and Resnick alongside Orlandeau. Before I touch on the build here, guys, though, I really have to say that I have heard some talk out there, really selling this unit short, and people I think are really underestimating him. I have to tell you, he is a similar archetype to Esther, and while he's not quite on her power level, he's really not going to be that far off at all, especially once he gets these job enhancements here in the near future. And in some ways, I would say he is even better than her. And I do think with a strong support behind these two units, it is an excellent pairing, and I think that their kits fit together and flow together, very, very nicely. Now the core strength of this team, will just be outlasting and whittling down your opponent. The name of the game for this Lightning team is going to be putting up their debuff resistance, and you're going to augment that even further, within your Trust Stones. You're going to have even further debuff resistance there. At the same time, you're going to be putting your own debuffs onto the opponent, further enhancing your sustain, and eventually just sort of overwhelming them. Now keep in mind, once again, Sid will not be at his full power when we first get him this week. Some of that potential is locked behind some of these upgrades that we've been talking about. Until that point, I do think this team is still viable, but just not quite as good. The weakness of this team certainly will be magic damage. As we talked about, Orlandeau does have that innate magic weakness, as does Esther as well. I do think strong missile damage dealers will be able to expose them as well, especially if they're able to get healing power down onto them. But, as long as that doesn't happen, Resnick should be able to heal them up. She does actually provide that 50% physical barrier as well, which Orlandeau doesn't have access to innately, and that certainly will help his sustain even further. So again, I think as long as you're focusing physical-based opponents with this team, you're going to do very, very well. Now you can see in this build, I do have some focus on accuracy here with the Alex ring and an accuracy-focused Trust Stone set, and you can see he is at a 383 accuracy level. Considering I haven't gone all in on accuracy here, that is a pretty nice level, especially when you consider that he does have a 30% hit modifier on one of his attacks. Now he's doing all of this, while still having over 10,000 HP, over 100 agility, and he's going to be over 1,500 attack as well. Now I'm not going to drill into all of the specifics of the build, but you can actually get his attack even a bit higher than this if you were to take both of his attack-based passives. But considering this was meant to be more of a bruising sustain style build, I didn't opt to do that, just so that he wouldn't take too much of a hit on his defense and resistances. Now the defense penetration on Orlandeau here of 40%, I think is definitely one of his weaker attributes. Remember though that he does have access to that defense break, which would help that situation. And I just think, with the amount of debuffs that not only Sid can put out here, but also Esther, she has unit resistance down, she has slash resistance down. And that along with the high slash resist penetration that Orlandeau has, the damage level really is not going to be a concern for this team whatsoever. Now, if you do want to dig a little bit more into the details of this build, I will go ahead and put a link to this in the description below. Just keep in mind that it is the JP builder, so I was not able to use the asterisk alpha sword there on Esther. So what are my feelings here on Orlandeau? So initially a few months back when I looked at the EX upgrade prior to those sub-job enhancements coming in, I thought that it was pretty decent, nothing incredible there, but it was decent and viable, and I definitely saw some potential there. I do feel like that they may have already settled in on those enhancements for those jobs, while they were creating his EX and sort of had those in mind as they were putting them together. Because now that we can see the full picture of this unit and what his sort of final form is set to be, I think that it's pretty clear that from everything we looked at there, he is going to be quite good. Is he going to be the dominant meta unit that he was when he first released? But remember that this is just an 80 cost unit, and I do consider him to be one of, if not the strongest 80 cost unit that I've seen in the game. And he is going to be able to hit well above that cost level. Now, Orlandeau certainly was helped that, he just had a quite strong kit to begin with. And with what they've done to augment it, I think that it's going to hold up quite well from a PvP perspective. It does also really help his case that he's in a very strong lightning element with a great supporting cast that can really amplify and harness what he's able to offer. Now, in terms of PvE, I don't think that he's a particularly compelling option for guild raids, just due to his lack of chaining capability. Otherwise, his kit is actually pretty well suited for that. He does have a lot of nice debuffs. Again, though, I do consider, when we're looking at that final picture of what his upgrades are slated to be in a couple of months, he is a pretty compelling option for competitive PvP. Lightning, though, as an element just has so many great options, especially when it comes to slash-based damage, that at the same time, he's just not completely necessary or needed if you have those other options already. Though if you were interested in that physical bruising setup that I highlighted in the previous section, I do think that Orlandeau would be the best option alongside Esther for that style of play. Alright, as sort of a bonus section here, guys, I am going to talk a little bit about Ramza's vision card as well, Scions of House Beowulf. And if you played the game, when this card first released, this was an incredibly hyped item. And for good reason, it was our first agility card. And this card was just incredibly hard to max, when it was initially released. Of course, we didn't have pities or guaranteed banners at that time. These shards were also incredibly hard to find in the shops as well. They weren't automatically included in the Whimsy shops either. So you pretty much just had to pull for this thing, until you were able to max it. I know that there are a lot of people that have this sitting at 2 or 3 stars and are excited to finally get this back so that they can finish it off. The good thing is we're actually getting a bingo board for this, so it will be a relatively cheap investment for people that already have the vision card. If you don't have the card though, is it still worth a pull? Well, let's just take a quick look at the stats here. In terms of the base stats, I would say nothing really amazing here, especially that HP stat is definitely one of the lowest that I've seen on a UR vision card, and definitely a big weak spot, I'd say, of this card. The attack and magic value is fairly interesting in that it's pretty balanced, compared to most vision cards out there, especially the ones that are released now. And I think that does actually offer you some flexibility in who can equip and wear the card. In terms of the effects on this, the bestowed will just give a basic 10 slash attack, which I think is pretty outdated. The party effects, though, is where this card really shines. As mentioned, this is a rainbow effective 15% agility, meaning that effect will apply to units of any element. On top of that, for any light units that happen to be in the party, it's also going to give them a big 35 slash attack modifier. We are getting a global buff here on the card in the form of a limited bestowed ability when Ramza has the card equipped. And this was definitely a nice surprise and certainly not an unwelcome one. And Ramza will get a bonus to his attack stat as well as an additional light attack modifier. So I'd say, in terms of an overall package here, it's especially good for light parties, of course. Even more so if you happen to be using Ramza in the party. But we do have the Black Rose of the Battlefield card here in Global, which is also a rainbow effective 15% agility card. So in what situations would I want to use this Ramza card over that one? Now, first off, it would of course be for a light party, as I just mentioned. The second potential option would be if you wanted to equip the card on an attack focused unit rather than a magical one. Of course, the Black Rose card is a magic focused card and doesn't really have much attack to speak of on there. Now, the third one, and perhaps the most compelling reason you might want to use this card, would be in a limited cost situation such as limited guild war or class match. And this card does have a 10 cost savings, when you compare it against the Black Rose card. Of course, the Black Rose card has an ability tied into it, so it has a higher cost at 80 rather than this one, which is at 70. Now, the final one would be, I think, the most obvious one, and that is that you just don't have the Black Rose card or you haven't finished it yet. And in that case, go ahead and grab this one, finish it out. I think that a Rainbow Effective 15% agility card is an essential item to have in your toolbox for pretty much anyone. Alright, so that is the end of part 1, guys, and Ramza and Orlandeau are now in the books. So just to sort of recap here, unfortunately Ramza, really got the short end of the stick when it comes to upgrades. Orlandeau, on the other hand, he was king of the hill, once upon a time back in the day. He doesn't quite get there with his EX, but, with his job enhancements, I think it really does make him a formidable threat out there, and definitely a viable choice in PvP. Now, House of Beowulf, at one time, it was a must grab. I think that we do have a lot of other agility options out there in the game, but if we do get a 10k Visior guaranteed for that card, I think that it could be worth a pickup as well too. So that is going to do it for today's video. I'm not yet done with tactics though, and there is more to come. Remember that this is a 2-part series. I will be back soon covering both Agrius and Delita as well. And that should actually be out here within the next couple of days. I know that this return to tactics has been very highly anticipated by the community. What did you actually think of this first batch of enhancements that we reviewed today? Were they worth the wait, and were the enhancements enough? Are you happy with the upgrades, or are you walking away disappointed? Did you already have the units from before, or will you be going all out for their banners when they're released on Wednesday? Definitely let me know about all that and more in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.